Hi viewers, welcome to the third section of the course, the component router. In this section, we will start with setting up an application to support simple routes. We will then move on to navigating with router links, navigating with the router service, and selecting location strategy for path construction and building stateful router link behavior with router link active. We will also implement nested views with route parameters and child routes, work with matrix URL parameters and routing arrays, and add route authentication controls with route guards. We will now move on to the first video of this section that deals with setting up an application to support simple routes. In this video, we are going to be specifying the base URL and instruct the browser. Then, we will be importing router module and router interface, and lastly, using the directive inside the route application. Few features of Angular 2 should be anticipated more than the component router. This new routing implementation affords you a dazzling array of features that were missing or severely lacking in Angular 1. Angular 2 implements matrix parameters. This is an entirely new syntax for URL structures. Originally proposed by Tim Berners-Lee in 1996, this semicolon-based syntax gives you the ability to robustly associate parameters not just with a single URL, but with different levels in that URL. Your application can now introduce an additional dimension of application state in the URLs. Additionally, Component Router gives you a method of elegantly nesting views within each other, as well as a simple way of defining routes and links to these component hierarchies. For you, this means your application can truly take maximal advantage of defining an application as an independent module. Finally, Component Router fully embraces integration with observable structure and provides you with some beautiful ways of navigating and controlling navigation within your application. Central to the behavior of single-page applications is the ability to perform navigation without a formal browser page reload. Angular 2 is well equipped to work around the default browser page reload behavior and allow you to define a routing structure within it, which will make it look and feel like actual page navigation. The code, links, and a live example of this are available at this link, ngcookbook.herokuapp.com. So now we are getting ready. Suppose we have this function defined globally. The purpose of this is to merely allow you to navigate inside the browser from JavaScript using the HTML5 history API. Now let's see how to do it. In order for Angular to simulate page navigation inside the browser, there are several stepways you must take to create a navigable single-page application. Moving to the first topic, that is, setting the base URL. The first step in configuring your application is to specify the base URL. This instructs the browser what network requests performed with a relative URL should begin with. Anytime the page makes a request using a relative URL, when generating the network request, it will use the current domain and then append the relative URL. For relative URLs, a prepended / means it will always use the root directory. If the / is unavailable, the relative path will prepend whatever is specified as the base href. Any URL behavior, including requesting static resources, anchor links, and the history API, will exhibit this behavior. Note that base tag is not part of Angular, but rather a default HTML5 element. So, here are examples of this. This is the first example where initial page location is foo.com. This is the same element, and it functions as new page location, that is foo.com/bar. The browser recognizes that this is a relative path with no prepended /, and so it will visit the page at the same depth as before. This is the next element, and it works as new page location, that is foo.com/bar/. Same as before, but the trailing / will be important once you invoke this again. Here is the next element, which specifies new page location like foo.com/bar/bar/. Same as before, but the trailing / will be important once you invoke this again. Then we have another element where new page location is foo.com/bar/bar. the browser recognizes that the URL ends with a /, and so visiting a relative path is treated as a navigation into a subpath. This is the last element of this example. It displays new page location that is foo.com/QUX. With a slash prepended to the URL, the browser recognizes that it should navigate from the root domain. Now we will be moving to the second example where initial page location is foo.com. This is the element which shows new page location that is foo.com/xyz/bar. Base URL is prepended to the relative URL. Then we have this element which shows new page location that is foo.com/xyz/bar. As was the case before, the local path is treated the same by the browser. Here is the last element of the example, which shows new page location is foo.com/QUX. Note that in this case, you specified a relative path originating from the root domain, so the base href is ignored. The next topic we are going to see is defining routes. Here, you need to define what your application routes are. For the purposes of this video, it is more important to understand the setup of routing than how to define and navigate between routes. So for now, you will just define a single catch-all route. As you might suspect, route views in Angular 2 are defined as components. Each route path is represented at the very least by the string that the browser's location will match again, stand the component that it will map to. This can be done with an object implementing the routes interface, which is an array of route definitions. It makes sense that the route definition should happen very early in the application initialization, so you'll do it inside the top-level module definition. So, first create your view component that this route will map to, default.component.ts. Here, we need to create app.module.ts file. We are importing router module and router interface. Here, we have a default component and define a catch-all route inside the routes array. Now we will see how to provide routes to the application. You've defined the routes in an object, but your application still is not aware that they exist. You can do this with the forRoute method defined in router module. This function does all the dirty work of installing your routes in the application, as well as passing along a number of routing providers for use elsewhere in the application. So, we will be adding router module.forRoute, and in brackets we need to type approute. Here is the forRoute method we were talking about. The next topic is rendering route components with router outlet. Here we need to have app.module.ts file. So the component needs a place to be rendered, and in Angular 2 this takes the form of router outlet tag. This directive will be targeted by the component attached to the active route, and the component will be rendered inside it. To keep things simple, in this recipe you can use the directive inside the route application component. That's all. Your application now has a single route defined that will render default component inside application component. Now it's time to see the output. So, here we have index.html file, and this is the body part, within which we have our route tag. Then we have response.json file, and this is the line of code we need to add in this file. Another file we have here is main.ts file, where we are importing platform dynamic and app module. Lastly, we have a system-config.js file. We will be saving this file. For displaying the output, we need to run certain commands in CMD. So this is the first command we need to run to connect with the local host server. That is npm install -g http-server, then press enter. It will take a few seconds to fetch the metadata and install. The next command is to change the directory to the folder where our project files are saved. So we need to type cd app as my files are saved in app folder. The final command is http-server-0 and press enter to connect to the local host server. Here is our output. This is the output we can see on the local host server, that is 8081. Now we will see how it works. This recipe doesn't show a very complicated example of routing, since every possible route that you can visit will lead you to the same component. Nonetheless, it demonstrates several fundamental principles of Angular routing. In its most basic form, a route is comprised of a string path matched against the browser path, and the component should be rendered when this route is active. Routes are installed via router module. In this example, since there is only one module, you can do this once for using route. However, keep in mind that you can break your routing structure into pieces and between different ng modules. Navigating to a route will cause a component to be rendered inside a different component, more specifically, wherever the router outlet tag exists. There are many ways in which this can be configured and made more complex, but for the purpose of this simple module, you don't need to worry about these different ways. There's more. Angular 2 applications will not raise issues when operating with no form of routing. If your application does not need to understand and manage the page URL, then feel free to totally discard the routing files and modules from your application. Now we will see the initial page load. The flow you are hoping your users would go through is as shown. The user visits www.foo.com/. The server matches the empty route to index.html. The page loads, requesting static files. The Angular static files are loaded and application is bootstrapped. The user clicks on the links and navigates around the site. Since Angular is wholly managing the navigation and routing, everything works as expected. This is the ideal case. Consider a different case. The user has already visited www.foo.com/before and bookmarked it. The user enters foo.com/bar in their URL bar and navigates to it from there directly. The server sees the request path as /bar and tries to handle the request. Depending on how your server is configured, this might cause problems for you. This is because the last time the user visited foo.com/bar, no request for that resource reached the server because Angular was only emulating a real navigation event. This scenario is discussed elsewhere in this section, but keep in mind that without correctly configured server, the user in the second case might see a 404 page error instead of your application. In this video, we have learned about setting up an application to support simple routes. Great!